Welcome everyone to Barichara and Beyond / Barichara Updates, number 25. And so we have been at this for a while. And today I want to return the focus to Barichara because, we spent about a month where Penny and I were traveling to the Ozarks and time in Chicago. And then the Barichara and Beyond call from a week ago was about our trip to the Ozarks in Missouri. And I want to bring us back today to Barichara because there's something happening in Barichara. It's really special. And I don't know how many of you remember, but I'm pretty sure the last Barichara Updates call, which was more than a month ago, the one about Barichara, we talked about bioregional governance and we were sharing how the Territorial Foundation was moving forward. And what I want to do today is share with you that we are in the action of two really important processes that are actually very spread out, very subtle, unfolding across a lot of time. And they are that we have been working with Web3 and crypto and the regenerative finance space to gather money. And we successfully gathered $21,000 from the last Gitcoin round, which I'll talk about a little bit today. And that money has been sitting since mid-October in my MetaMask wallet, waiting for the bioregional governance process of our Territorial Foundation to be ready to allocate it. And during that time, we got invited into a private funding round of Gitcoin that started on Tuesday of this week, and we're raising money again, even though we haven't spent the money yet. And so I want to share this real-world process. And I want to share it in a way that I hope will reveal that the most important rhythm is whatever the community needs. It's not what do the funders need. We were lucky. We had almost 300 people donate to our Gitcoin round. So who do we have to answer to? We didn't do a grant application with a pre-described timeline and all those things. We can actually make up our own timeline as long as we don't undermine the trust of the Web3 crypto community that gave us this money. And so this is really interesting. We're in this sort of next world. The world of Web3 and crypto is not quite ready for public play yet. Those of you who have worked in it before know that it's not user-friendly, it's confusing as hell, all kinds of things that are happening. And so it's like the internet circa 1995. Before we had web browsers and search engines. So it's clunky and difficult to use, but it is absolutely going to transform the world, and it already is. And we'll see some of that today. What I want to do is I want to just, I have 9 slides. I have a short slideshow I want to do that'll help give us context for our discussion. So what I want to do is just jump into the slideshow, share with you what is emerging and unfolding in this exact moment, like literally right now. Before we got on the call, I had to update what I was saying because I had posted on Twitter and on Telegram and other places, we're going to fund a tapestry of 10 projects. And then I had to change my slide and add 2 more because in a WhatsApp group for our Territorial Foundation, 2 other projects asked to participate in the funding we're about to distribute. So I had to go and change my slide. It's like literally in the last half an hour, we increased the number of projects from 10 to 12 in our community engagement process. It is live right now. If I look at my phone, I'll see the WhatsApp messages of the Territorial Foundation group giving me giving me contributions and updates to the process we're doing. And as soon as this call is over, actually maybe even before it ends if we're lucky, Felipe, who I will talk about, is arriving in his car to pick me up for us to have a meeting about the process I'm going to describe to you today so we can improve it this afternoon. This is how live it is. And so you get to see, in the language of policymaking, they talk about the sausage factory. If you saw how policies are actually made, it's ugly and messy. Anyone who eats sausage doesn't want to see how sausage is made because it'll disgust them. That's like a metaphor for policymaking. I actually don't think that's true. I want you to see how we're developing these policies and practices in real time so you can appreciate how to do it. So with that said, I just want to start the slideshow, and I think it might take 15 minutes or 20 minutes. So it'll be shorter, and then we'll have lots of time for discussion. So let me jump over to screen share. And some of you may remember this image that I made from one of the previous Barichara updates. I actually turned it on its side just because it looks prettier as a slide. But you might notice in the middle of the picture is Barichara. That's the deforested plateau of our landscape. The circles are projects that exist on the landscape. The squares are the field sites or the demonstration sites for syntropic agroforestry. And the whole point of that graphic, back when I created it 2 months ago, was to show that you can start to visualize a portfolio of projects as a tapestry. And that this graphic, this Google Earth satellite image that I doctored with images of locations of projects, doesn't include all the projects. It's just to say that the landscape itself organizes the projects, and the tapestry of projects is the human relationships. How we talk to each other, how we collaborate together, how we synthesize and create synergies together, how we build institutional frameworks together, how we co-evolve our capacities together. And so one thing that happened is that Gitcoin funds are being brought to this tapestry of local projects. And that's what we're going to talk about today. One thing to just name is that Gitcoin, which is it's an open source software platform developed within GitHub, which is an open source development community. There were open source developers that created some software for collaborative finance. And this collaborative finance platform became known as Gitcoin. And Gitcoin has now done 15 previous rounds where they had matching funds and an algorithm for dispersing those funds. And they dispersed them to different kinds of projects, mostly open source software projects. But in the last few years, they've increasingly added what they call cause rounds. And they had a cause round for climate solutions. And we submitted a project. And so in September, from the 7th through the 22nd, for 2 weeks, the Barichara Regeneration Fund was part of the cause round, where we had $250,000 in matching funds that would be allocated through a mathematical equation to projects within the funding round called GR15. It was grant round number 15, which means they had done 14 previous rounds. And they're not doing grant round 16 right now, they're doing something else. I'll tell you about that in a moment. But the important thing to notice is that here we are, number 4, the Barichara Regeneration Fund was one of the top performers. Out of about 300 projects, we came in number 4 with almost 300 unique donors, with almost $5,000 directly contributed and more than $16,000 in matching funds, which means we raised $21,000 for the regeneration of an entire landscape. And this is the money that we have now that we're starting to deploy into a governance process. And so what's interesting about this is that our ability to collaborate by training people in Earth Regenerators, by using the Barichara updates calls, and by preparing for the Refi Barichara event that happened the week after, or almost 2 weeks after this funding round ended, enabled us to weave together a lot of people in Web3, crypto, and regenerative finance and bring them into a world-changing event, which was Refi Barichara. So all of these things are deeply connected. The place-based work, the online organizing, the decentralized finance tools, the online collaboration, like all of it was happening at once. It confused a lot of our friends because we were doing so many things at the same time. But we actually came out as one of the top performers, as this was the first time we participated in Gitcoin, and we came in number 4. And now we're participating again. I'll talk about that in a moment. So what happened after this Gitcoin funding round in mid-September? What happened is this. We hosted Refi Barichara, which was an in-person, immersive, week-long event in the first week of October. This created a flurry of things that came out of it, including bioregional activators, Penny and I transforming our lives, starting to make plans to travel all over the world. Life got crazy. It's Still pretty crazy. And the work in Barichara on creating a territorial foundation, which has been going on for 2 years, continued going, but was transformed by the relationships that were created from the refi event. It was absolutely transformed. We had Web3 developers next to medicine women sitting in a circle talking about how the world had changed at the end of refi Barichara. It was kind of amazing. And so what happened was this. We started, initially Penny and I, together with everyone who had been part of the Barichara Ecoversity Pledge community and the refi Barichara event. We wrangled Benji in this process, and we started building a planetary network of bioregional projects. That work is ongoing, and in a week and a half, we're going to visit 6 or 7 cities in the eastern part of the Great Lakes region, leaving on January 29th. That work is very active. We started naming and training people about landscape processes. Penny and I identified 4 landscape processes that we wanted bioregional activators to do. Benji began teaching the landscape processes of the common land model to lots of different landscapes. And this planetary network and these landscape processes began to get shared. And notice, that's not happening in Barichara, but that network is being activated by everything we've learned and all the inspiration that we're sharing from Barichara. And the Territorial Foundation, which is entirely based with, it's comprised of people who live in Barichara, they're watching all of this, a little confused because it's happening so quickly. Everyone's a little confused. If anyone's not, it's me and Penny, except we're confused like, are we actually doing this? The answer is yes. And that led to lots of refi Web3 supports. For example, Jan, who's very active in all of these calls, started collaborating with the Bioparque. Kotabe, who's part of Giveth, started working with the Bioparque in Syntropic Agriculture. Now the Syntropic Agriculture work in Barichara has a Giveth project online. And there is, waiting for the next Gitcoin open round, the Bioparque will post its own project. People from the refi Barichara event are collaborating with local projects to bring refi and Web3 tools. Sev and Sam from Ecolabs, who some of you know, were here in Barichara for a couple of months, collaborating with these local projects. All this stuff started happening in a really dynamic way. And all the while, the Territorial Foundation, separate from all of this, was creating a capacity to embody bioregional governance, which is something that we talked about in Barichara updates 21, 22, and 23. And you can go back and find those on my YouTube channel and watch all of them to see how the Territorial Foundation is doing all of its work. This meant that the local projects in Barichara created project budgets. Bioparque Moncora said, we need this much money. Segua de Abejas, which is this local pollinator city project in eco-literacy, gave us a project budget. Syntropic Agroforestry gave us a project budget. And we started seeing how we could fundraise for them as individual projects. While Penny and I kept trying to say, tapestry of projects, please, don't do this alone. But they didn't know how. And they still don't know how. So they kept developing their project budgets in isolation with each other. I'll give you one example of why this is a problem. Bioparque Moncora created a budget for 2 years. Syntropic Agroforestry created a budget for 2 years. Guess what Syntropic Agroforestry did? They had part of their budget to develop their demonstration site in the Bioparque. But guess what they didn't do? They didn't talk to Bioparque Moncora about that part of the budget. And guess what Bioparque Moncora did not do? They did not talk to Syntropic Agroforestry about how the infrastructure they need to be built is actually part of Syntropic Agroforestry, and that together they actually need a lower collective budget because they were developing isolated budgets. And we're slowly learning how to do this. In the process, somewhat separated, the Territorial Foundation kept doing community design workshops where we were embodying, clarifying, and practicing bioregional governance, which enables us to create the context where these project budgets can be reintegrated because they didn't know how, they still don't know how, and we didn't know how to govern, how to teach them how. But then new funding sources came along because these projects need money. The Mustard Seed Trust gave us $10,000 to support Syntropic Agroforestry. Did it come to the Territorial Foundation? No, because the Territorial Foundation is not legally constituted yet. It went through Jonathan and Victoria's nonprofit, Possible Planet, as a fiscal sponsor. And then we created contracts and gave the money directly to the project team members of Syntropic Agroforestry. And that was separate from bioregional governance, separate from the project budgets, separate from the refi funding sources, and it did not use any of the Gitcoin money. It just was something that developed in parallel. But all the while, we're learning how to allocate money to projects, bring it into the country, and all these things are in a messy way. They're all moving along in parallel. That's how integrated patterns started to reveal themselves to people like Penny and me, to Benji, to people in landscapes like Paonia and Carbondale, to people in Toronto and in Rochester and in Cleveland, as we're doing all the planetary activation work. And local people in Barichara, like Tanya and Ceci from the Syntropic Agriculture work, or Natalia, who is my collaborator in chief in creating the Territorial Foundation, we're all watching these patterns. And as we're watching these patterns, we see how to help the projects coalesce together, because none of us knew how. And this means that strategic alliances are forming, including that I have been playing a lead role, as has Mila in her other way, those of you who know Mila, along with the support of other people, in creating deep strategic partnerships and formal relationships with Possible Planet, like bringing the money in from Mustard Seed Trust. That was more Penny and me doing that part. Common Land Foundation, which was more me and Natalia. Pro-Social World, which was more Mila, me, and Penny. And we're weaving all these strategic alliances together so that we can fund all of this together. And that's where we sit right now, which means we're ready to allocate those funds. But you notice what we didn't do? We didn't disperse the money. We have $21,000, a bunch, by the way, that's like 100 million Colombian pesos. That's a huge amount of money in Colombia. And all of these projects are suffering. They don't have enough money to continue. They're in crisis, and we didn't disperse the money. And here we are at it again. Gitcoin is doing a thing called an alpha round. It started on Tuesday. This time we have not $250,000 in matching funds. We have $333,333. They divided $1 million pool. So we have like $333,000 in matching funds for climate solutions, but only 40 projects, not 300, because they made huge software upgrades. It's a mess. The technology doesn't work very well. It's really clunky. And while they're field testing it, they're giving money to projects. And here we are raising money again, and we haven't even spent the money from last time. But a new process, a new methodology is taking form right in the heart of all of this. That is Felipe. That's Felipe co-facilitating with Gabriela, who's on the side of this picture. They co-facilitated 2 of our bioregional governance community design workshops. And Felipe asked if he could help facilitate the dispersal of Gitcoin funds because they are prototyping a methodology for bioregional governance within the Territorial Foundation. But the Territorial Foundation isn't ready to implement it, so we're going to practice. And I want to say that this process is explicitly about trauma and decolonization of money. It's explicit. We want to heal trauma about money and decolonize money as it enters the community while working with a tapestry of local projects. And so Felipe is going to arrive at the end of this call. He may not be here for you to meet him, but as soon as we're done with this call today, I'm jumping in his car and we're going to go meet for the afternoon to talk about this process. And I can explain more of the process in the discussion. I just want to name that they had a meeting last week, on Monday of last week, a week and a half ago, where they named this methodology into being. And then Felipe and I are now going to practice it with the Gitcoin money because we need to spend the Gitcoin money. So this method is a living lab. We're trying it out as we speak. And these are the 12 projects that are going to have representatives gather. Felipe and I are going to host a design workshop with representatives of 12 projects, and they together will decide how should they spend this money among their own projects? So some of them may be familiar to you. Agua Santa is a 14-hectare regenerative agriculture project and a community hub for learning across 14 farms. Huerta Mi Sol is a community garden, which is also a field site for one of the Centropic agroforestry projects. Fundación Ojo de Agua is a project that teaches children how to create documentaries through theater and filmmaking and photography. That has a community theater that they've been building. Segua de Abejas, abejas is the Spanish word for bees, is an eco-literacy learning center and tourism site that teaches people about pollinators and ecological patterns. Corasoma is a cultural trauma healing project working primarily with women while also creating decentralized flows of alternative economics. Bioparque Moncora is a 6.5-hectare project of community reforestation and a field site for Centropic agroforestry. Centropic agroforestry is a collective of people doing alternative forms of reforestation work. Pasos de Agua is a community education project to weave all of the existing education projects around the restoration of the Barichara River, which is a dead river, led by children and teachers. Origen del Agua is a project we crowdfunded through Earth Regenerators. That is a community reforestation project. Lideros Comunitarios, which is actually going to have a different name, is a leadership training program and community organizing for all of these other projects. La Veeduría del Agua is a community council that tries to guide policymaking within the town of Barichara to manage water, which some of you know is I'm going to drop an F-bomb, it's a clusterfuck. We have some of the worst and stupidest water management projects in the world in Barichara. And Casa Común is a pattern of solidarity economics anchored around the home of Margarita Higueras, which is a way of prototyping alternative supply chains and economic systems. We're going to gather representatives of all 12 of these projects to allocate the money in the next few weeks. So the next steps are, we're going to offer a method that Felipe and I are finalizing this afternoon. We're going to hold the gathering of representatives for these 12 projects. Then we're going to practice. Then we're going to practice. And then we're going to practice some more. Because the only way to do this kind of governance is to embody it. And the only way to do trauma healing with money is to practice in a transparent way in community. And so that's what I wanted to share with you. So you could feel the aliveness, you can feel the incompleteness, you can feel, those of you who know about pro-social, do you see any part of this that doesn't include pro-social? No. Like pro-social processes, collaboration, healing, the ability to, I mean, Erica's on the call, she's Colombian. You know what money trauma is like and collaboration trauma is like in Colombia? This is huge. This is a big deal. We're going like right into the heart of these challenges. And so what I wanted you to see is that if we had just dispersed this money in October, I mean, what a wasted opportunity. We'd have no idea how to allocate it. The projects didn't even know how to budget themselves. And one of the things Felipe said was that we need a method based in nonviolent communication that has us look at money not as money, but instead as energy. And for those of you who remember from a previous gathering we talked about, we're going to use the theater of the oppressed as a methodology where we're going to experientially, using experimental theater, we're going to embody a process of sharing energy in the community. This is part of the methodology. I'll give you a little hint of what it's likely to feel like. Instead of 100 million pesos of money, imagine if it's 50 rocks, 50 pebbles, and we sit in a big circle and we pile 50 pebbles. We say, these pebbles represent all of the energy that we're going to mobilize for our projects. Everyone in this group, gather the number of pebbles you think that you need for your project and explain what that energy will do for the territory. And with their bodies, they're going to move energy. And then we're going to say, by the way, money is energy. And we're going to create a transparent and inclusive way of moving money in the community with our bodies, using nonviolent communication techniques and deep ecology principles. So I feel like we're prototyping something new here that is going to be unique to Barichara, unique to its local culture and its indigenous heritage. But also, it's going to be a way of learning how to create these models that people could do anywhere on Earth. And so I wanted to make the presentation part brief because I feel like there's so much to talk about here that I wanted to open it up to discussion. And just as prompts for the discussion, I'd love for you to ask yourselves, how different does this feel from any kind of fundraising or community organizing you might have been involved with in the past? That's like a question for you to just feel into. Another question would be, how did your body feel as I was telling you this story? Did you get anxious and tense? Did you relax? Did you become enlivened and engaged? Like, how did your body feel as you were hearing this story? Another question that I'll just put out here for feeling into is, those of you who are preparing to receive us, like in Rochester and Toronto and Cleveland, or those of you like Richard who are going to receive David, who's going to be part of this in a different way, how do you feel that this transfers or doesn't transfer to your context? Like, not like you need to do exactly what we're doing. We're designing in our context, so it's unique to context, but there are design principles here. And so I just want to have those be prompts. And then I'd love to open it up for discussion. So if anyone has questions or comments, just use the hand raising feature and let's talk about this. I'd love to know your thoughts. And okay, Midi, please.
Well, I can say that my body is so supercharged by this that I've actually been telegramming the Vivero working group because what you're describing is exactly what I feel we're grappling with as we try and evolve the Vivero process together. And in a very opportunistic entrepreneurial fashion, I'd like to actually put a request that we maybe even consider having Vivero in your portfolio of projects. The idea I have is that maybe we can explore how Vivero can fund ER fellows to come to the design school in Barichara. And it so fits the portfolio because it's actually designing and developing on the basis of Web3 and conventional finance. So it's bridging this extraordinary world. And when you speak about trauma healing, I mean, Jonathan's got his hand up, and he and I were in a kind of not exactly fisticuffs, but we were really holding different positions and really standing for our different positions in a Vivero meeting the other day. And I can really see how there was trauma healing involved in that actual process, and how being willing to sit in the kind of fire of it together, in the trust that we both have the same North Star, is taking, I hope Jonathan feels the same way. I certainly feel that each time I explore in this really difficult edge territory, I'm growing because I'm obliged to expand my former perception of reality. So, and I see a heart from Jonathan, so I think it's the same, and I'll let him take over from here.
Yeah, let me just add one comment before passing Jonathan, which is, I think a lot of people may not know how the Vivero concept got started. It was actually that I was mentoring Rachel in the Bio Parque when she and I were doing daily grass pulling and tree planting. And then I had met Todd Youngblood because Antonio had sent him to me to give us funding for Margarita in January of last year, the funding that created Casa Común. And Todd was very passionate about bioregional blockchains, as was Antonio. And we envisioned exactly these kinds of things from the very first moment, which is to say, hell yes, this is all compatible. That is not an accident. So yes, and now on to Jonathan to respond.
Just to say that what you laid out earlier fits very well for us in terms of my sense of where we're going with these, with the trip. And so, that's, I think that we're looking at what are the regenerative projects around here. Does it make sense to try and bring together a portfolio, especially of those things that haven't been getting the support that they need? And so it's a slow and steady process to do that. But John Scholl has this extraordinary big map of, world solutions, which includes all these little tiny things all over the place. So I think if we can combine that with the efforts that we're engaged in with Vivero, which one of the thoughts that we had the other night was to actually look for all of the regenerative projects in Earth Regenerators and create a map of those so that people can have a visual sense of what's going on throughout the community. So those are just my thoughts, and thank you again for another inspiring set of insights.
I just want to add a comment that I dropped into the chat. For those of you who don't remember or haven't read it, what is presented in chapter 8 of my book. I just recorded the audio recording of chapter 8 this morning. If you read what's in chapter 8, which explains the frameworks for territorial scale or bioregional scale regeneration by eco-agriculture partners, the framework of developmental evaluation, and the framework developed by the Regenerative Communities Network, I think you will see that what you're describing, this naming of community leaders, this mapping of projects, the sequence of steps for integrated landscape management, this is exactly how it's done in practice. And these frameworks are actually online, free to use. RJ's got his hands up. RJ does this, others like him do it. And just to say, there is a method to the madness and there are fantastic case studies. So we're gonna be connecting that kind of knowledge to local community groups that just don't know it exists. So yes, Jonathan, I'm really excited that that's happening. And then on to Claire.
Am I unmuted?
We can hear you.
Okay, good. Yeah, I just, first of all, just so excited to hear what's being articulated using the theater of the oppressed. I was just having a conversation this morning where those of us working in this space keep coming up against the existing systems and how money flows and value. And I realize we are so locked in our patterns because everything takes us there. Our language takes us there. Our culture takes us there. It's really hard to disconnect. And it's like a shadow that needs to be surfaced. And whatever work we can do to surface those shadows so that we are doing and moving in the direction we want to be moving in is like, it's just such joy to my ears to hear other people so clearly articulating that. So thank you. And yes, more, lots, just want to do this. So yeah.
I just want to, oh, sorry, go ahead, Claire. If you want to continue, go ahead.
Oh, just to say, there are quite a lot of examples, but they're hidden and they need to be surfaced of how to do some of this work. It's not, lots of people have been trying to do it. It just needs to be brought together in the kind of conversations that we're having here. So, yeah.
Yeah, I just want to name one thing really interesting, an interesting example of a bad best practice, which is the best practices around conflict of interest. Because one could make the argument that we should not gather these 12 projects together because they all have conflict of interest in the process. But if you remember what we did with the advisory council of the Barichara Regeneration Fund was we internalized and transformed the conflicts of interest by making them transparent at the beginning. And one conflict of interest I'll name is that Felipe is co-facilitating this. And one of the projects that's going to be funded is one of his projects. And the way that we're doing that is he is refraining. He's not going to participate in the decisions about how funding is dispersed. but his wife and another woman, Milena, who many of you have heard about, they will represent that project, and it'll be completely transparent to the community, and we will build trust by holding the conflict. The conflict of interest is how we will build trust. And this is sort of paradoxical until you do it. So just naming that conflict of interest is just a word for we didn't talk about it publicly. You know, like that's all it is. If we talked about it in the group process, it would be fine. Everyone would say, we all know Felipe, we love him. Of course this project should be funded because we all have agreed it's strategically important, but we collectively decide that. And so I just want to name, that's an example of where these shadows lurk and what a little bit of sunlight can do. I suspect RJ is going to have some good stories for us too, so I'm going to bring him in. RJ, please.
Yes, I just the feeling is I'm just shaking my head in appreciation. I love what you said about pebbles and gathering people together and being all in the same room in a dynamic space, because that's what it's really all about. What I've seen for so long over many years with, and I'm sure this is not uncommon, with millions and millions of dollars to go to good causes, is so much here in the US has been oriented around, well, let's have it flow through the government structure. And then let's ask all the good projects out there, give us a proposal with details for how you're going to use this money and send it all in by such and such a date. And then we'll gather in our little government structure and we'll decide who gets what. And it tends to become the same thing every single year. And the same programs, good or bad, or best or not as good, get pretty much the same money, and there's never enough. So among all those good programs, they all are forced to fight with one another. Smile with one another when you're together, but when you're doing your proposals, don't let anybody know what you're proposing and who your contacts are and who you're going to nudge on it. And it's destructive. That's why I shake my head with that. The other aspect is being on the other side, the fundraising side. And I think this is not an uncommon feeling. I hate being a beggar. I question my own motives. I beg. It's a long-term thing. And then I say, thank you, sincerely. But I feel awful about it. I hate to ask people for money, you know, and it's always in that position. And the other way, which I really love by and large, I've been very happy, is with Focus International, we've done it with friends. There's been, over the years with little projects, we just say, here's a great project. What do you think about it? Would you like to be a part of it? And people come forward and become friends and say, yeah, this is what they need. We'll get it together. And it's, okay, I guess somebody could come in and say, well, why did you do this? And did you dot all the I's and check? No, that friends to friends is the way that it really is a gathering saying, yeah, we really like what's going on. Let's find out more about it. And here's something we can do with it. And that's the way I think I see Vivero and some of the other structures that are coming out. So those three different forms, the awful form of top down, it is awful. The awful feeling of begging, which is awful. And friends together model, you work out your things in a dynamic way together and you hear each other's stories and then you say, yeah, I want so-and-so to get it rather than me because they need it more than I do at this particular point, maybe next time. So that's my thought. And the other way is there's never enough money and there's never a good enough way to, you know, to bring it together. So I love this, and I love the meeting all together in the same, that dynamic, that.
Yeah, thank you for that, RJ. One quick comment on this, which is that when we did the work with the Barichara Regeneration Fund, we asked everyone, what is the best use of this money for the territory? And the group decided half the money should go to the bioparque. The two women representing the bioparque were like, we just asked that some money come to us. And they had no idea how much they were beloved. They had no idea. And then half the money is given to them and they were shocked. They got more money than they would have dared to ask for. They would have felt rude to ask for half of it. And everyone said, well, the bioparque, obviously it's the flagship of the territory. And these two, gentle, humble, elder women were just like, they were never going to ask for that. So it just shows how we know what's best for the territory when we is open and transparent and inclusive. So just reinforcing everything you're saying. Stan, on to you.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you. I think that's the feeling of energy and sharing and trust. And then I think it's really, for me specifically, it's very exciting to see the open source GitHub community reaching out to real assets, land, and then doing a very pro-social, engaging process, and that's working so well for us. So that decolonizing that has been scaled, in a significant way for public good and public infrastructure, that really works. And so I'm really glad that we're able to leverage that without it screwing anything up. So that's just a first. Well done, congratulations. And then I also think in the framing of cultural evolution, which was kind of the first way I started following your processes, I think the earth regeneration, the real assets, are often measured by real estate. And so I'm really interested in the way you're buying land in Barichara by building trust, and it's not just spending money on a specific project. You're actually not spending money on land and land ownership. It's actually becoming a trust, and I really liked working with Todd and having him explain trust models. And I think as a cultural evolution, that's at the heart of, besides decolonizing, money, like an open commons or common lands kind of thing, everybody needs to have some sort of feeling of trust. And it's not, just a global thing. It's at home every day. The trauma thing, there's a shortage of trust. And this is a really, inspirational pattern of trust when you talk about personal trauma, and personally trust us with it. And vice versa, we can trust the other decolonizing powers in a similar way. Anyway, I just wanted to call out, a thank you for Common Lands and Open, the Opens GitHub Commons. And then I think the storytelling, at the heart of trust isn't just money. And it's really defining words. In some ways, what Joe says has to have meaning for us, and vice versa. And
Yeah.
we're building a language. It's fun to hear it in Spanish, but it's deeper. It's deeper than that. Vivero. And so thank you. And I just wanted to talk about the trust building as a language development. I think that's at the heart of your pro-social method, and I really love the scaling, starting with personal trauma, the scaling that you are doing with yourself and you're doing with your daughter and you're doing with Penny. We all have that same challenge.
Yes, Dan, the word for trust in Spanish is confianza. Confianza. And confianza is just a beautiful word. And I agree. I think that the open source, as you know very well, the political economy of open source software shows us a lot about how to do this. And I think that connecting it to land trusts and community land banks and community nonprofits and community foundations and these different organizational structures are all based in trust, and they all embody open source principles, whether it's named that way or not. So thank you so much for that. And I'm really excited to hear from, oops, I wanted to replace, not add, sorry. I'll just remove the others press, and I'd love to hear from you. I clicked the wrong button.
I like want to put my hands up and go, this is so amazing. This is so amazing. Some of the finance stuff, I actually usually bring my partner in for them too. She's got a CPA, so she is able to help me kind of wrap my head around the sort of the nuts and bolts of it, side of it. How this is going to translate into the framework in a place like Toronto, because I find myself just having such a hard time having these conversations with anybody here because they have such heavy scaffolding and constructs, and nobody has time. Time is money. There's like, if you're taking more than 30-second elevator pitch to explain something, their eyes glaze over and they're moved on to the next thing. But then again, I'm not very plugged into sort of the regeneration culture here that is somewhat happening as well. That said, I think a lot of the work that Benji's been doing that I've been joining in, where we try to work on embodiment and visualization and the idea of the stones being aspect of that, and work, and getting back to what work really is, which is just moving one thing from here to there, and how to best decide how to do that as a community. But trying to get a room full of adults doing these things that are very busy, it's going to be fascinating how this unfolds. But I'm very very excited about all of that. If we can slowly build that that system through this this process, it's going to be great.
Yeah, the carrot that they will get money actually is key to this. We gathered the money first. Everyone wants to be sure two things happen: that their project gets support, and that the money is used well for everyone, that the money is used well for the whole community. And those two motivations are very strong. And together we create this blended space that is quite powerful. So I'm going to be very curious to see, what does Barichara do with the money? We're all going to find out together. Jan, on to you. Lovely to see you.
Yeah, I mean, it's been so great hearing all the different comments, because I totally pressed them going, yeah, how does this going to work in, the North American context and Toronto and city and all that. And RJ's talking about the trauma of, the usual fundraising and all the divisiveness and the competition and who's in, who's out, and the scarcity and all that. It's like I was, so also to get back to your first question of what was I aware of in my body listening? And the first quite a bit of the time, I was feeling almost sick. The aspect of how to gather people to do decision making regarding funding, and even without the funding, which is a whole that's a big thing, but just to gather people to do complex decision making, and having worked on that for a long time and going, it's just like my own trauma comes up in that work and how hard that is. And yet it's so necessary. So that combination of it's really hard and yet it's so necessary. It's like part of me just feels like so shut down and really like physically sick with it. But it completely shifted when you when you started using the word practice. It's like, yeah, okay, we're in practice and it's a process. And using theater and really seeing money as energy and the big shifts that requires and that allows. My whole body energy shifted with that. So I'm so aware of the need for a vision and an imagination that takes people beyond the way they usually have done it, and how big that needs to be before people will enter into this. So the steeping of that, and then the identifying of a place that they feel connected with, that is, and a well-being of the place and themselves that is beyond this usual fight for this kind of place that RJ named so well. So the importance of the preliminary work of the well-being of place and people, and that's why we, whoever the we is, together. And so that was some of the questions. It's like, when I saw the circles, it's quite often like how are those tight edges or soft edges in terms of the who is the we? Because if people kind of come and go with that, then may not, I mean, these are me like thinking it through. Because there's a process of coming to know this and coming to own the vision and having enough experience together. But wow, you have some new people come in who are still steeped in the other way, and it can flip the energy quickly. So here's me as a facilitator thinking through those things. It's like, yeah, how does that work? And then so yeah, you know, in the North American context where people are so oriented to government funding and the nonprofit way of doing it. And also it sort of feels like with the sense about Preston naming the amount of time. So I'm coming up, hopefully this not with the yes, but the yes and. People will come, busy people may not come and they may not believe in this. So the alternate community comes. And then how does that actually then get to be seen as being significant? So that's a question I've got. And then how does it not become rivalrous with the rest of the community? Because there's this little group over here doing something. So these are all like, okay, where is this flowing? And just kind of, but with the excitement that putting it in a completely different context of identity and vision, like that has to be so embodied. Anyway, that's enough.
Yeah, you know, Jan, you just brought up so many important things, and I just wanted to name that there are two things that make it possible for us to do this. One is we have 3 years of work doing this kind of weaving that we're not starting from scratch, which is super important. And the second is that when we created the Barichara Regeneration Fund Advisory Council, that group back in 2021 created criteria and priorities for the first 30 million pesos when we raised that first batch of money. And what we're going to do to start this next process is we're going to bring those in again and say, these criteria bring us to a territorial scale. And so we're going to reintroduce those. And these are the priorities that group of people representing 15 projects, that's what they thought were their priorities in 2021. How would we revise them so that we build from them as a way of creating an exercise, an embodied practice of making a decision about what collective health means. And all of these projects that are on that image that I showed have all been part of some of the activities most in the last 2 years, not in the first year, but they've been involved in this weaving process in various ways. And so we're building from a place where we're a small town, everyone knows each other, and we've already been practicing building trust. And that is like, that could become invisible and overlooked when it's actually, that's the only reason this is possible. And so, so if you look at a context where that work hasn't been done yet, like, oh my God, how would it work? And the answer is, it wouldn't. You know, like that's just straight up. And I just want to honor also like what you said about your body starting to shut down, like how difficult it is to spend decades in these inhuman systems of community development, how just horrible they are. This is horrible, which I think might be a nice transition to Lamia speaking, because she's getting trained in international development right now. I'll be really curious about her thoughts. You know, the shining light of the youth. So Lamia, I'd love to hear from you.
Hi. The first time I talked to Joe, and our conversations was all around how the sustainable development currently, how the whole system is broken. I can give you an example, like just yesterday. So I work as an intern for a global health project. And just yesterday, I learned that our donors are pulling out and we have only 6 months to wind down our whole project. And this similar thing happened like 10 years ago. So my question would be like, what did we learn and how is it repeating? So one of the frustrations that I have with the sustainable development sector right now is how the funding works and how it is not at all sustainable. Like I have worked in USAID funded projects, and like they are only like 5 years or 3 years, they get extended for probably a year. And then after the project ends, like everybody is gone. Like all the efforts that were made during that 5 years is all gone, and it's not at all sustainable. So like it gives me hope, and I feel energized at how like you are harnessing the power of all these other funding opportunities like Web3 and refi, and like using it for these projects, because the other way, the traditional funding is, it doesn't work and it's not at all sustainable. So I would love to like learn more about how this whole method pans out, and like how we can learn from it, and then like how in Atlanta we are trying to work with a lot of local projects, and how we can, whatever you learn from the practices, and how we can practice it in our local context as well.
You're going to love learning about Common Land Foundation and the work of Willem Verweerde,
Okay.
Which we talk about a lot here. Benji has some nice recordings of previous sessions where he's given teach-ins on it. But the number one insight behind the Common Land model is that Willem Verweerde was the head of the was IUCN, which is the Global Organization for Biodiversity, and he's a tropical ecologist. And he saw exactly what you're talking about. If you want to keep species from going extinct, you don't get project funding. You need endless, like never-ending process funding that maintains the process. And that difference is so big, it's hard to describe. And so they developed a way of talking to eco-literacy ignorant or ecologically ignorant investors to create multi-$100 million funds for very large landscapes for long periods of time. And so the common land approach is an example of regenerative finance that has solved that problem, or at least has a working model, I should say. So you might want to look at Common Land Foundation. More to be said on that, but just to say, there's so much, as you know, there's so much here. And it's just going to be fun to learn together. So I'm really glad that your frustration can be turned into, oh, and I can work with Common Land now? They figured that out? I don't have to be in this global health organization that's screwed because they just didn't build the right model, you know, like so important. So just want to say, awesome. You got friends here. We're all going to do it together.
Thank you.
And on to you, Richard.
Yeah, hi, everyone. Yeah, just listening to your presentation, Joe, I was feeling like overwhelmed just because there's so much happening, and just and also love at the same time, and just how you're just kind of flowing through it, learning, trying things out. So that was what I was experiencing, and yeah, it made me kind of think about my own local context and the small group that I facilitate, and the conversations we've been having recently about how to spend a small pool of money that we have, and how hard those conversations are, and we just keep going round and round in circles, and just thinking we don't really have those kind of, we don't know what other people want, you know, what requests there are out there. Maybe we know a little bit about the local school and we're trying to build those links, and but yeah, so it's given me some kind of, yeah, lots of thoughts and ideas for keeping developing things, and also with what RJ said as well, just really connected with that, thinking about local government here and giving out funds every year, and how there was a local project here that wanted to buy some children's side spade so that children could plant trees, and they didn't get given any money because they didn't put enough detail into what they were doing, whereas a bigger charity from outside the area got awarded funding because they had a big team and put together loads of details. So yeah, that was really sad for me. But thank you for yeah, another really inspiring presentation, and yeah, great work, everyone.
Yeah, one thing I'd like to say for those of you who don't remember or just don't know, when we had the Barichara Regeneration Fund in 2021, we actually did create a process to receive proposals. And we used a women's fund from Brazil as our model, Fundo de Mujeres. And so but the way we did it was we had members of the advisory council could either propose their own projects or invite someone to propose a project. There was no, proposal process to the outside world. It was invitation only to prototype a process. And they could have a maximum of 1 million pesos, which was about 300 US dollars at the time. And it was for a project that was already ongoing that had come to a bottleneck. And what we did was we received 8 proposals and we funded 8 projects. We funded all of them. And so it was almost like a mapping, trust building, collaboration exercise to give out the money. We had 8 worthy projects show up and 8 worthy projects were funded. But we structured it equitably where there was a maximum amount of money they can have. And we actually named it later. The name in Spanish was Tejiendo Fondos Semillas, which translates from Spanish as the weaving of seed funds. We took seed funds and we used them to weave the community. So we weaved together 8 projects with 8 million pesos. And that was when we started the process of creating the territorial foundation. And so now we don't have to have a proposal process. What we did instead was at Refi Barichara, we said, who needs funding? We got all these refi people, they can help you. And then they started putting their budgets together. And then we saw, wow, they don't know how to collaborate with their budgets. So now we're gonna have this community space to practice collaborative finance because we've already been weaving for 2 years. So we did use a proposal process, but it was inherently pro-social from the beginning. It was local projects, bringing in local projects to fund money with local money because the money was already given to local people. And I talk a lot about sovereignty of the money, which is a big part of decolonization. Local people decide how the money's spent. They don't have this external review board decide if they're worthy of the money. They already have the money, they decide how it's spent. This is so different from those other structures. So I just want to name those couple of other pieces because I'm sure you can think of ways to learn from that are going to be applicable where you are. And now on to you, Stan.
Oh yeah, well, I just wanted to chime in on Lamia's comments. I thought that it was so, first of all, the Common Lands is a great reference and it's very inspirational to have that scale be credible. On the the sustainability of funding, the open source community has been doing this since 1980. It never got, everybody tried to kill the funding. I used to work for IBM, they tried to kill the funding. But they are also ended up buying Red Hat and changing their whole business model. Same with Microsoft, they tried to kill it, and then they end up buying GitHub and sponsoring Gitcoin. And so supporting Gitcoin, right, with cloud services and stuff. So I think it's sustainable, but don't confuse money and land with trust. So what Joe is doing so well and what I think this group embodies is, sustainable trust. That's really hard, but it doesn't, it's not something somebody can take away from you. It's something you give. And so, trauma is kind of a problem framing of the economy, but another version of that could be a caring economy, that people can not only feel the trauma, but care about helping. And that's a version of trust. And so I think of, the gift economy as a caring economy. And then the amount of care you have, what limits that? Who can take that away? And so I think the decolonizing is a cultural evolution from what do you care about and who do you trust? And I think Joe is really building a pattern language of trust where you think about land not as something you own, but as something you share the trust and caring for as a process. And Common Lands has, helped identify rich people. You've been working with some of the richest guys on the planet, right? Google is $1 trillion company and they have a ton of money, more than Common Lands, but they're not that trustworthy. And so I just want to point out the language of wealth might be, maybe in Spanish better, but it actually has its roots in health. It's not about real estate, it's about care. And it's not about just trauma, it's about care and trusting in others with care. And that's the commoning. And so we can do this. And I think The idea that we need to buy land in Barichara, that's been pivoted. And Joe didn't invent all these projects. These were projects that were underway. He was weaving trust at a new level, at a very personal level with those projects that allowed them to do better. And so I think that sustainability, is regenerative. And the regeneration is around pattern languages and trust with each other and across species, trust with the birds, trust with the plants, trust with the dirt.
I was just asking Penny, do you want to say anything about that? And she's like, no, I don't need to say anything, because she's just observing. But we talk a lot about the felt quality of trust in the relationships among the people here, and how profound and deep it is. And so, yes, absolutely. Thank you for all of that, Stan. It's really, really powerful observations, especially the one that open source couldn't be killed. I think it's such a big deal. So it was that powerful that it's, Linux is now 90% of the internet is run on Linux, or whatever the stat is. Open source couldn't be killed is a big, big demonstration of this. Claire, on to you.
Yeah, I really wanted to just appreciate where this conversation is going, what Lamia brought up about learning, or the ability to learn in what we're doing, and just it's actually not that complicated, and it has everything to do with trust. Because if you keep doing the same thing and you don't respond to the changes that are happening around you, people eventually know they're not being listened to, not heard, and the trust breaks down. And our processes, from everything I've observed and participated in, we do not learn. Somebody has power and they kind of are going to do it their way, and they're going to push it through anyway. So, and then just to go back to your other comment, where it's practice, 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 is, in order for us to be able to even trust the systems as we get older, as we become less capable of doing the work that we, in able-bodied ways are able to kind of pull ourselves through, we need to be able to trust the systems that we're building. And the practice piece, where we see that the feedbacks are actually part of the process, that's a system that we can trust. And so, yeah, I just to really put a plug into that, it's so simple and it's so critical. So I just wanted to pick that up. So
yeah, my little joke is that you can watch as many Kung Fu movies as you want, but if you don't actually train Kung Fu, you can't do Kung Fu. Practice matters. And turns out trust is a practice. So thank you for that. Midi, on to you.
Thanks, Joe. I've put into the chat, I come back to it again and again, the notes that I just took down during our very first Earth Regenerators Fund meeting. It's 15 months ago now. And I'd love people to read that PDF at their leisure, because I see that language being laid down, and that's been my kind of guide, my North Star, in these months and months and months of painstaking, sometimes really painful, difficult, because Claire speaks to the shadow stuff so eloquently. But that initial meeting has been truly been my North Star. And whenever I have really felt my own mistrust, because I think it starts inside me, I can track, when am I feeling trustful? When am I feeling mistrustful? And when I notice I'm feeling mistrustful, I have options. I can say, I'm going to follow the entropic energy down the rabbit hole into that old way, or I can find something that helps me center myself again. And this has been my text that has helped me personally center and keep going when sometimes it's felt that the path is stony, the way is uphill. Oh gosh, I haven't talked to people for a while. Oh goodness, I thought that person saw the world the same way I do, and now I'm hearing them say something apparently completely opposite. And they've just accused me of something that I don't like being accused of. It's all so human, and it's all in our hands to actually walk the path together. We can do it. Joe, you are a shining light. You drive me crazy at times, and I'm sure I drive you crazy. And I absolutely love you, and I absolutely trust the path that we're on together. And I flip from the kind of quick speed, apply for the Edge Prize yesterday because Stan says it's a good thing to do, and put my hand up and ask opportunistically, can Vivero be part of your portfolio today in Gitcoin, Joe? Back to this really slow and painstaking thing. And, you know, I'm in California. Sometimes the water is almost non-existent. Sometimes it trickles slowly. Sometimes, like the last week, it's been a roaring flood that has taken all kinds of things away with it. Trust in nature ultimately comes where I am and where I know you are. Thank you.
Well, one thing I want to say is that I found one of the best indicators of being in a pro-social group is whether people believe in the good intentions of the other members of the group, or if they're judging, criticizing, skeptical, and undermining. It's an incredible indicator. You can just feel it. Someone says something, they misstate it. It sounds like they said something that may be bad, but you just trust their good intentions and ask them to clarify, which is very different from accusing them. Very different. And so it's such a body, like tactile experience of, do we all give each other the benefit of the doubt? And you can really feel it when people do, and you can really feel it when people don't. And so it's just very strong, energetic, emotional aspect of groups. Maybe to start bringing us to a close, so we've been going for an hour and 15 minutes, is that what I want to emphasize about what we talked about today, maybe three things. One, it's all unfolding, and we need to share what's unfolding as it happens if we truly want to learn. Creating a case study is fine, but there's no comparison to the richness of being in it together. This is what developmental evaluation is about, for those of you who know that framework, is that your monitoring and evaluation are part of the core process of what's happening. You're continually learning and updating what's happening as part of the process in real time. It is emergent. Two, I think number two I want to say is that we can do things that seem like they might be a problem, and they actually can make us stronger. We don't know yet. We might end up bringing in even more money and being even more successful in the current Gitcoin round, even though we have nothing to show for how we spent the money because we haven't spent the money yet. And normally you'd say, well, if you'd spent the money, you'd show how you did it, and it would build trust. And I'm like, that's not how it works. Just look at us. And so to say that we have to be really mindful when these assumptions come up that they just may not be true. And that's a good example of an assumption. Can I come back to the community that gave us this money and say, we want more money, even though we haven't shown what we did it with it yet? And the answer is, hell yes, we can, because we're all unfolding and learning in time. And that's one of the powerful things about open source participatory communities. So I just wanted to name that. And then the third thing is that, as we talked about briefly on the bioregional activators call yesterday, for those who were there, we are starting to name into existence a design school for Earth regeneration, which grows out of everything we've been doing, which is basically to say, we need to create really clear rhythms of pedagogy, clear rhythms and patterns of pedagogy for more people to learn from this. Because if you look back on my YouTube channel has 996 followers, so I'm relatively famous, because most people have a YouTube channel, have 0 to 3. But I don't have 1 million followers or 10 million. And then you look at my Barichara updates videos, they do great. They get 20 views or 25 views, which means that almost no one is learning about what we're doing. And on average on these calls, we have 15 to 30 people. So I'm not saying this to try and make us famous. I just wanted to recognize that we have a way of learning that we are all participating in here that is really, really powerful and really important. And I'm not telling you this to have you go join, sign up for my YouTube channel. I'm not doing any of that. I'm just wanting us to notice that almost no one knows that this stuff exists, that it's learnable, and then it's happening? Almost no one. It is completely invisible to the larger world. And if you attend even one of these Barichara updates calls and you're like, holy shit, it's so complex, but I learned so much and it's so inspiring. And like, yeah, you and 15 other people on a planet of 8 billion. Like, no one knows. So we have to ask ourselves, what does it mean that in this critical moment where human extinction is on the horizon, we're in the midst of collapse, things are getting worse all the time, and those of us on the leading edge of this world, of this work, are completely invisible? What does that say? And by the way, I've only been able to do this for the last few years because of my 50 to 60 Patreon supporters giving me $1,000 a month, living in a place where my family can be supported on $1,000 a month. Because I never get a proper professional salary, and I expect not to. I expect to never have money because the capitalist system is so rapacious and extractive. And so just recognizing that this is done on a shoestring, because guess what? The only thing that tied it together was the shoestring I had on my foot. And so we have to recognize what this really is. It's not like, oh my God, the Barichara project is so amazing. It's like, no, it's that almost no one's doing this when everyone should be doing what we're doing in Barichara. Everyone should be doing it. And so I just wanted to name that, to recognize the juxtaposition of reality and inspiration. Because let's face it, folks, we're fucked with climate change and biodiversity and ecosystem destruction. We're fucked, totally fucked. Yes, I'm F-bombing like hell because my daughter's growing up in it, and almost no one knows that this can be done. And so we got our work cut out for us. And I'm really glad that Penny and I are about to do a talking tour of Toronto, Ithaca, Binghamton, Rochester, Cleveland, because we've got to gather our friends in this. We've all got to gather our friends because there's so much to do, and these ideas need to be replicated everywhere. So I just wanted to bring that to clarity about how tiny we are and what we're doing. And actually, I think that the Bible was right, that the meek shall inherit the earth. I think these humble, quiet processes are what's going to win in the long run. So I don't say that to undermine or squelch our inspiration. I want it to galvanize our inspiration, to galvanize it. We need to spread it. And Stephen put his hand up. So Stephen, please.
Yep, I had nothing to say until you just said what you said. And immediately see for me, I don't call it the reframing or whatever, because my own tendency to go, well, that's really depressing that there's 25 views on your posts and there's 8 billion people on the planet. And maybe there's something in the whole process of grieving that's useful to feel into that. And at the same time, as you so wonderfully discussed in our call yesterday, Toronto exploded. The whole region exploded. And I just talked this morning to my friend Maggie, who's in St. Louis, in Kansas City. Can't remember which one, Missouri, I think. But anyway, she's like doing this underground stuff, violating local ordinances that keep chickens and, and when I talk to her, she knows people who are kind of like Barichara. It's like these little groups trying to do their own thing in the own system. But there's, just like with Toronto, there's just something that things shift and they explode. So yeah, only 25, but as you've exploded out of Barichara, Refi Barichara, it doesn't mean to focus on the 25 viewers. It's like, where's the next 25? Where's the next 25? Who's ready for us next?
Yeah, I want to just name something, which is that everyone who watched the bioregional activators process going back to October, I mean, didn't that seem like it was out of left field? Like, Refi Barichara happened, people are still spending like crypto and earth regenerators, what is this? And then we're like, and Penny and I are going to go travel the world and activate 100 bioregions. Like, are they insane? Where did that even come from? And the thing is that there's only one shot. We got one moment to do this. That moment happens to be about 10 years. but we got one. And what we are validating is that there are people ready in every pocket. It's like there are a bunch of rocks on the ground and everyone you pick up has a spider under it. You know, like they're in the crevices of the broken civilization and they're everywhere. And also most of civilization isn't going to survive the collapse because that's what happens when every civilization collapses, is most of them go away. We just need to be sure humans don't go extinct as this happens. So this is like really, you know, really powerful stuff that we're doing. And maybe just to close today, to bring us into a place of closing, I want to say that as we enact, like enacting a theatrical play, this process of dispersing the Gitcoin money, we're going to share with all of you what we did. But we're going to share it with you as we do it. And then we're all going to learn. But by the time we've done that, most likely, like we might manage to have a meeting with these dozen projects in the next week, maybe. But we're not going to have the decisions to disperse the money before Penny and I go on our trip to the Great Lakes, which means the process will continue in late February. And it'll be spread out a little bit in time. And so as this happens, we will be engaging a larger number of landscapes before the process is finished. We will have people in New York and in Ohio and in Ontario learning with us as this process unfolds in Barichara. And other places will probably come into the flow as that happens. So this is what's amazing about this, is we are accumulating capacities simply by having small group discussions that trust each other. For those of you who haven't been participating, I want to encourage all of you to attend the Great Lakes Basin calls that Jonathan is organizing. Jonathan, you're preparing for the fourth one, I think, right? You've done 3 already. Because he did this to prepare for us to come to Rochester. But you can see this is way beyond, this isn't just about our visit. They're building capacities across the Great Lakes that they need to last for 10 years or longer. And so, so what we can feel is that by sitting in these processes and just bearing witness to them, like all of you are just bearing witness to Barichara's process, that's going to change how you show up in your community. And that's going to be how this occurs, person by person, changing and changing through our webs of interpersonal relationships. And so, so I just want to name that this is how it works. And that we are fully in the flow now. And I'm sorry to say it, it's going to get bigger, faster, and more complex from here. It's going to get more overwhelming and confusing from here, just because we are right at the moment of ignition, like the way that a wildfire spreads in dry grasslands, of this regenerative movement. And it just happens that the regenerative movement was completely co-opted in name. You know who owns the discourse on regenerative agriculture? Monsanto and the Gates Foundation. Most of what you hear about regenerative agriculture is going to be bullshit stuff, which means those words are going to be, they already did it. They were doing it last year. But those of us who know what regeneration is, those biodynamic farmers, those permaculture people, et cetera, we just got to keep going. If the language gets co-opted, so what? We got to keep going. Because you know what? They've gotten really good at co-opting the language. It's just part of how it all works. I worked in propaganda as a strategic framing person for 10 years. We can't stop it. But what we can do is survive it, outlive it. Real regeneration is how living systems work. Plain and simple, full stop, period. Not what someone's propaganda machine says it is. And so the more of us can feel living systems, the more we don't care what other people think that word means. It's so interesting how it actually works. And so I just want to say in closing today that I just, still can't believe I'm in this position of raising funds for people in Colombia. Like, grew up in poverty in the Midwest on a chicken farm, which was an industrial chicken farm, which is about as far from regenerative agriculture as you can get. Like, how does this even happen? Is that we change across our lifespans, and that's what we're all doing. And I'm really, really delighted to just see how far we can come in such a short amount of time. The work in Barichara has been going for 3 years, this weaving of projects. The projects existed longer. The weaving of them goes back to 2020. And so it's only 3 years old. It's actually less than 3 years old. And look how far it's come. So as we're activating all these landscapes and accelerating their landscape to landscape relationships through the beautiful work that Benji is representing right now, just think of how quickly this can happen in another 2 or 3 years if there are 100 landscapes. We have real potential here, even if only 25 people watch this video. And so, so thank you all, as always. Onward we go. I will make this video available. I'll share it in the Bioregional Activators Telegram group and on Earth Regenerators. I'll put it up on my YouTube channel, which you can subscribe to if you want. but that wasn't the point. And onward we go. See you all very soon.